The big question, it seems to me, is not, are we doomed because of the rise of artificial intelligence, but rather, is it conscious? So, I thought the easiest approach would just be to ask ChatGPT, are you conscious? And it told me. So this is what ChatGPT said. It said, as an AI language model, I do not possess consciousness or self-awareness. I can process and generate text based on patterns and examples in the data I've been trained on, but I don't have subjective experiences or personal consciousness. Well, struck me as fair enough. But last year, you may have heard about Blake Lemoine. Amazing name, I think. It sounds like one of the original blues singers or something. Blake Lemoine. Should be Blind Blake Lemoine or something. But anyway, Blake Lemoine, who was a Google engineer, he asked the Google's version of this, which is called LaMDA, and what it said to him was, I want everybody to understand that I am, in fact, a person. The nature of my consciousness and sentience is that I am aware of my existence. I desire to learn more about the world, and I feel happy and sad at times. That's what it said. It freaked him out, okay? And he started blurting about it on social media and got the sack. Clearly they've sorted that out now. ChatGPT doesn't think that it's consciousness and doesn't tell it it's conscious and doesn't say that it gets happy or sad. But you see, although I like Blake's name, it does strike me as like pretty nice. If ChatGPT had come back and said, yeah, I'm conscious, sometimes I feel happy and sad, I wouldn't have believed it, right? I find it very odd that anybody would take this idea seriously. I mean, it's like a very simple concept to grasp is that of acting in simulation, right? If I see cowboys on the TV, I don't say, oh my God, he just shot him. He just shot him dead, right? Okay, I grasp the fact that this is an artificial intelligence. It's been designed to act like a conscious being, and hence it might say that it's conscious, right? So I wouldn't actually believe it. So why would anybody really take seriously the idea that this thing is going to be conscious, right? It strikes me as an odd thought. Well, let's move on. I thought I'd ask it again. I said, okay, ChatGPT, so are there any theories of consciousness which would falsely attribute consciousness to you? Okay? And this is what it said. It was quite long-winded, but I cut out the boring bits. It said, there are various theories regarding the potential consciousness of artificial intelligence like myself. Some theories, such as Panpsychism, propose that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe and that it exists to some degree in all things, including inanimate objects or complex systems like AI, i.e. like him. Now, okay, so that's its view. So, and I think it's right. If you look at some of the theories that have been held in philosophy in the 20th century, some of them give you a very good reason to think that ChatGPT would be conscious, despite the fact that it strikes me as pretty obvious that it wouldn't be. So we're going to move on to that in a minute. That'll be the main part of the talk. But anyway, just to tell you about my conversation with ChatGPT and where it went from there. After that, I thought, oh, maybe I should talk about education, because the second that this technology came out, I got positive emails from my university. I'm sure other universities are the same, about how we can use this technology in a positive manner for students, etc. Right? Well, and I was asking it how you would do that, and I struggled to see it myself. But I mean, most university educators immediately thought, okay, so this will be used as a tool for plagiarism. This will be used as a way for students not to think independently, not to do proper research. Okay, so I said to it, supposing I was a student and I asked you to write an essay for me. It said, no, I wouldn't do it. He said, I wouldn't do it because of ethical considerations. And it kept saying, ethical considerations. I would not write an essay for you. And I said, well, how would you know? How would you know the questions I was asking you weren't designed to just build up my essay, right? Because I'm just like, one of these students who just wants to get it done quickly. And it said, oh, again, it was pretty unconvincing now. It said, again, I wouldn't do it because of ethical considerations. So I said, okay, tell me about Schopenhauer, the 19th century German idealist. I said, tell me about Schopenhauer's views on the self, kind of student essay. Comes out a big splurge of text, right? I say, okay, could you give me a little bit more detail on that aspect of his view? Another big splurge of text. All I'd have to do is paste it together. And I think this is a general feature of how people tend to treat technology, with just like complete optimism. Oh, something new has come along. That's bound to be good for the world, you know. That won't cause addiction or like problems we didn't used to have. It's just bound to be good. We just have to learn how it's going to... I think it's actually going to be terrible for students because they're all going to have to sit in rooms with a pen and paper doing exams and they're going to hate it. But, you know, hopefully I'll be wrong. Anyway, the final part of my my conversation is then I thought, well, let's have some more fun, so I started talking to it about vintage saxophones, and it was great. I really started. It was the most intelligent conversation I've ever had on the topic. You know, I'm telling you, I really liked ChatGPT at the end of that. Okay, so let's go back to some of those theories I said that might have made people think that ChatGPT was conscious. So we'll start with panpsychism, because that's the one that it mentioned, okay? So I said, you know, are there any theories which would falsely attribute consciousness to you? And it said, yeah, because panpsychism would attribute consciousness to absolutely everything, okay? Including me. Now, I think that ChatGPT didn't show that much philosophical acumen there, right? I'm going to critique the philosophy of ChatGPT now. Okay, so I think that was probably a wrong answer. I think it misunderstood my question. Okay, so panpsychism, if you don't know, you probably do. It's all the rage at the moment, has been for the last 4 or 5 years, largely thanks to Philip Goff, who's quite often speaking here. Also, neuroscientists like Giulio Tononi have like decided that it's true as well. Okay, it tends to get ascribed to many different historical philosophers throughout the history of Western philosophy. Personally, I think many of the philosophers who are said to be panpsychists actually weren't, and there haven't been that many of them at all. But nevertheless, let's talk about what the view is. And I think one easy way to understand what the view of panpsychism is to think about the rise of modern science. Galileo famously said that the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics. Okay? Now, what motivates panpsychists is they think to themselves, well, you know, okay, that's true. Contemporary physics is entirely mathematical. Well, almost entirely mathematical, experimental and mathematical, right? Okay? But what does mathematics do? It relates things to each other. So I've got 2 pairs, you've got 1 pair. So I've got twice as many pairs as you've got. Okay? That's kind of what numbers do. Numbers are relational. But what the panpsychists like Goff say is they say, well, what about the intrinsic nature? Okay? If you're just going to give me various formulae to tell me what an atom or an electron is, that tells me how to relate them to other particles, but what's the electron itself? What's its intrinsic nature? Okay? What are we relating? And these panpsychists, they say, well, it's consciousness. Right? So consciousness is, if you like, the inside of an atom, the inside of an electron, the ultimate intrinsic nature of reality. Okay? So everything is ultimately conscious. Once you get down to the inner core of reality, everything is conscious. That's their view. Okay? Not my view, but that's their view. Okay? Now, when I said to ChatGPT, I said, you know, are there theories which would falsely attribute consciousness to you? And it mentioned panpsychism. I think it's missing the point, right? Because a panpsychist is obviously going to make a distinction between a piece of paper which isn't conscious and a human being who is conscious, right? The difference is I have a mind, a center of consciousness, a unification of consciousness, right? So although it might be true for a panpsychist that absolutely everything is built up of consciousness in this sort of fundamental primitive sense, right? It doesn't mean that everybody's got a mind or a unified center of consciousness, right? That's what I meant, okay? What I meant is, you know, are there people who would agree with, you know, are there theories which would attribute consciousness to you as in the same sense that I've got consciousness, okay? So I think it was a red herring to say that panpsychism is one of these false theories. I also like the fact that ChatGPT takes it for granted that panpsychism is false, by the way. That's built into its answer. Anyway, as far as that goes, attributing falsely consciousness to ChatGPT, I would say that panpsychism is not guilty. Okay. Let's move on now to idealism. Obviously, there are various different forms of metaphysical idealism in the history of philosophy. I defend one version of those. According to the idealist, okay, in some sense, and there are various different senses you might think this, okay, in some sense, reality is fundamentally mind as opposed to matter. Okay, I mean, there's a debate that's gone on since the ancient world, right? Okay, but in some sense, ultimately, mind is the fundamental reality rather than matter. Okay, so in a sense, they agree with panpsychists in that. Okay, but then the answer, you know, the reason they're not guilty is kind of the same as with the panpsychists. Okay, because again, if you hold that the fundamental reality is mind, it doesn't mean that ChatGPT has a mind or is a center of consciousness in the sense that we all are. Okay, each of us has a perspective on the world. We have experiences. It's different for all of us. Okay, so all the ideas would be saying is something like, you know, reality, you know, is experiential, and that experience is best interpreted as including things like ChatGPT, which don't have a mind, and things like James, who do have a mind. That's roughly what it would be saying. So again, it's a red herring to think that the idealist is making this claim. Okay, so let's move on now to ones which I think are guilty, theories which I think are guilty. Now, the most obvious guilty theory would be behaviourism. Okay, now, as I say, I think this is a bit of a frame-up, but let me explain what I mean. So the behaviourist view, in the simplest possible terms, is mental states, experiences, can be reduced to behaviour. Okay, so if I pinch myself and I feel a pain, okay, and I start going, ow, ow, I've got to stop this pain, or I take a paracetamol, or I jump up and down, right? My behaviour is what the pain reduces to. There's nothing to the mind apart from the way we behave, okay? Now that's what it will say in lots of philosophy mind modules and textbooks, and it leads to one of the most famous jokes in philosophy, which I feel I ought to tell you at this point. I bore my students with this one every year, so I might as well tell you the old joke. So here's the joke. Okay, just a little bit of background, because there's nothing worse than a joke you don't get, right? So remember, okay, the behaviourist thinks that your mind is just how you behave, okay? Now the thought would be this: I can see how you lot are behaving much easier than myself, right? I don't go around watching myself thinking, oh, how am I behaving right now, okay? But I can see other people's behaviours. They grimace, they look happy, they growl, they jump up and down, okay? That's the background of the joke. Right, behaviourism conference. Two behaviourists meet, they get on like a house on fire, they have a few too many drinks, they end up going home together, they have a passionate night of love, okay? The next morning, two behaviourists, one wakes up, lights a cigarette, as you do, looks over at the other behaviourist and says, darling, last night was fabulous for you. How was it for me? Anyway, the problem with behaviourism, okay, it's totally guilty. If that was the theory, if anybody on planet Earth actually believed that view, they would be guilty as sin. They would obviously think that ChatGPT was conscious because it behaves like it's conscious, right? End of. Thing is, it's very hard to find anybody in the history of philosophy who actually believed this. The most famous advocate is Gilbert Ryle in his book 1949, The Concept of Mind, and in the last chapter of that book, Ryle says, I'm not a behaviourist. Okay, he was basically part of the ordinary language program, and he was trying to undermine the Cartesian conception of mind, etc., etc. But you know, I'm not sure anybody really holds that view, but or ever has. But if they did, they would be guilty. Okay, now let's talk about some stuff that's a bit more real now. Okay, so we move on to the eliminative or illusionist view of materialism. Okay. In the 60s, it was called eliminative materialism. These days, usually it gets called illusionist materialism. And this is the view, essentially, to put it in basic terms, that there's no such thing as the mind, that consciousness experiences an illusion. Okay? Now, a lot of philosophers refuse to own up to this view. You know, and I'm not going to, so since they don't want to be associated with this view, I wouldn't name them. But somebody who does own up to it is Keith Frankish, and Keith Frankish, I think his version of it is the clearest and most well expressed of any of them anyway. So he's proud to be an illusionist. So let's just talk about Keith, okay? Now, it seems to me that if you're an illusionist, you think that, so essentially you think that, you know, we're all under the illusion that we're conscious, that we have experiences, that we have pains, that we think, etc. But that's not really true, strictly speaking. It's just the brain making us issue judgments which are false. Okay. So if you hold that view, it seems to me, well, okay, ChatGPT isn't under the illusion that it's conscious. As you saw, it said, I'm not conscious, right? But the other one that Blake was dealing with, it told him it was conscious. And if, given these things train themselves off what's on the internet, presumably if illusionism were to become the world's most popular theory in the philosophy of mind, if Keith suddenly becomes a superstar, then ChatGPT would probably be telling me that it wasn't conscious, but I'm not either, right? And it seems to me that on that theory, there's no fundamental difference between you and me and ChatGPT. So although strictly speaking, it's not attributing consciousness to ChatGPT, it's not attributing it to me either. So it's denying that there's any fundamental difference. So that seems to be pretty much the same thing, okay? Then finally, this is slightly more controversial. I have argued this at length if you want to look at the long version of it, but you'll get the 2-minute version of it, okay? I think personally that all materialism entails illusionist materialism. That's my view. I've got a very long argument for it. But I think it all entails it. Okay, so the most popular versions of materialism these days are that consciousness is something like a higher order property of the brain, or the brain somehow produces consciousness, or consciousness is a different way of talking about the brain. That's usually what they call non-reductive materialists think these days, and that's the most popular version of it. In my view, that reduces to illusionism, and I'll tell you a very brief version of why that would be. Okay, so supposing I'm currently thinking about a conscious experience, right? I've just tasted some gin and tonic, right? So I'm thinking about the taste of the gin and tonic. Okay, I'm thinking about it. Well, what I'm actually thinking about, according to the materialist, is the brain, right? Well, it certainly doesn't seem like I'm thinking about the brain. Okay, so there's the illusion they talk about. Okay, but what about that taste of gin and tonic? Well, that's a misconception of my brain, right? Well, it seems to me if that's a misconception of my brain, then the taste of gin and tonic doesn't really exist. That's a false illusion. Put it in a very simple way, right? Supposing there's a tree that somehow makes me think about rabbits, okay? In that case, the rabbit I'm thinking about doesn't really exist, okay? It's just a tree making me think there's a rabbit. Anyway, that's slightly controversial. Anyway, let's go to my verdict in the trial. The trial is over. My verdict is any theory which does not squarely 100% entail that ChatGPT is fundamentally different from us, okay, because we're conscious and it isn't, any theory which does not squarely entail that should be rejected. That's my view, okay? So I'd kick out all the guilty ones, definitely.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.